If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge. And when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. The Final Flight Launches Mystery. The morning of July 2nd, 1937, felt different. Something hung in the air as Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan prepared their silver Lockheed Electra for the most dangerous part of their journey. They had already traveled thousands of miles, but now came the real test. 24 hours of flying across empty ocean to reach a tiny island most people had never heard of. Howland Island sat like a speck of dust on the vast Pacific, just 2 miles long and half a mile wide. Missing it would mean certain death. The fuel tanks were full, but barely enough to make the distance. There was no room for error. At 10 in the morning, the engines roared to life. Radio operators around the world held their breath as the plane lifted off from Lae, New Guinea. Earhart's voice crackled through static, calm but focused. She knew what lay ahead. For hours, everything seemed normal. The Electra flew steadily toward its target. Radio messages went back and forth between the plane and the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, waiting near Howland Island. But something was wrong with the radio system. Messages became unclear. Static filled the airways. As dawn broke over the Pacific, tension mounted aboard the Itasca. The ship's radio operators strained to hear Earhart's voice through the growing interference. Weather had turned bad. Clouds blocked the sun and stars that Noonan needed for navigation. Then came the message that chilled everyone listening. Earhart's voice, tight with concern. "We are running low on fuel." The Itasca tried desperately to guide her in, but the radio problems made communication almost impossible. Time was running out. At 8:43 in the morning, July 2nd, came the final transmission that would haunt the world. Earhart's voice, now clearly worried. "We are on the line, 157-337, running online, north and south." "We are running north and south." Then silence. The radio operators called again and again. Nothing came back. The Electra had vanished, somewhere over 250,000 square miles of empty ocean. Two of the world's most experienced flyers had simply disappeared. Search ships raced across the waves. Planes scoured the endless blue. The world watched and waited for news that never came. How could a plane just vanish? How could two people disappear so completely that not a trace remained? What happened in those final moments above the Pacific? The questions began immediately and continue today. The mystery had claimed its first victims, but the search for answers was just beginning. The search and sudden silence. The silence stretched like a dark ocean. No more radio calls. No more hope in Frederick Noonan's voice. Just empty static where Amelia Earhart should have been. Within hours, the most massive search in American history began to unfold. President Franklin Roosevelt himself gave the order. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard mobilized with urgency that shocked even seasoned officers. Ships changed course from across the Pacific. Planes lifted off from distant airfields. The numbers tell their own story. 9 ships, 66 aircraft. Over 4,000 people searching day and night. The cost climbed past $4 million in 1937 money. Today, that equals $60 million spent looking for one small plane and 2 missing souls. Commander Warner Thompson led the search from his flagship. Maps covered every surface of his cabin. Red pins marked possible crash sites. Blue lines traced Earhart's planned route. Yellow circles showed where rescue planes had already looked. Each dawn brought new hope. Radio operators hunched over their equipment, listening for any signal. Pilots squinted through cockpit windows, scanning endless water. Ship crews stood at railings with binoculars, watching for floating wreckage or oil slicks. The first false alarm came on July 5th. A Navy plane spotted what looked like a silver wing reflecting sunlight. Ships rushed to the coordinates. They found only whitecaps and disappointment. More sightings followed. A flash of metal here, smoke rising there. Each one turned out to be nothing. Days stretched into weeks. The search area grew larger. Planes flew grid patterns over thousands of square miles of ocean. Ships dragged nets through the water. Divers explored coral reefs around Howland Island. Radio stations worldwide broadcast appeals for information. Amateur radio operators listened on Earhart's frequency. Reports trickled in from remote islands. A native fisherman saw a plane crash. A trader heard voices calling for help. Investigation teams checked every lead. None proved real. The pressure mounted on Thompson. Newspaper headlines demanded answers. Families of the searchers worried about their own loved ones in dangerous conditions. Fuel costs soared. Equipment broke down in the harsh Pacific environment. On July 18, 1937, the official search ended. Earhart and Noonan were declared lost at sea. The announcement felt like a door slamming shut on the greatest aviation mystery of all time. But ending the search didn't end the questions. Private expeditions continued for months. Wealthy supporters funded their own rescue attempts. Family members refused to give up hope. The vast search effort had found nothing. Not a bolt from the Lockheed Electra, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace of two people who had simply vanished into thin air above the world's largest ocean. The crash and sink theory emerges. The Navy officials gathered around tables covered with charts and radio logs. Their faces showed the weight of what they had to decide. Where was Amelia Earhart? The world waited for answers. The evidence seemed clear to them. Earhart's plane carried 20 hours of fuel. She had been flying for over 20 hours when her last radio message came through. The math was simple but harsh. No fuel meant no flight. No flight meant one thing. Radio operator Leo Bellertz wrote down her final words that morning. "We are running north and south," Earhart had said. Her voice crackled through the static. She could not find tiny Howland Island in the vast Pacific. The fuel gauge showed empty. The Navy traced her path on their maps. They measured distances and calculated flight times. The Lockheed Electra could only go so far. When the engines stopped, the plane would have dropped like a stone into the deep ocean water. Coast Guard ships had searched for days. They found nothing. Not a piece of metal. Not a life jacket. The Pacific had swallowed the plane whole. The ocean floor in that area dropped down thousands of feet. Any wreckage would sink beyond reach. The official report came out months later. Technical language filled the pages, but the message was simple. Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan had crashed into the sea. Case closed. Yet something felt wrong to many people. How could a plane simply disappear? Other pilots had gone down before. Someone always found pieces. Debris washed up on beaches. Bodies floated to the surface. But not this time. Earhart's husband refused to accept it. He hired private searchers. They found nothing either. The Navy stuck to their story. Ran out of fuel, crashed in the ocean, lost forever. Some experts whispered about other possibilities. Maybe the compass broke. Perhaps the radio failed earlier than anyone knew. Could weather have pushed them off course? The Navy had answers for everything. Their conclusion never changed. Years passed. The crash and sink theory became official history. Schools taught it. Books repeated it. But families and friends carried questions in their hearts. The empty ocean had given them no peace. Why did this case feel different? Other mysteries got solved. Other planes got found. This one seemed to mock every search effort. The Pacific kept its secrets well. The Navy's certainty began to crack under pressure. Too many people asked too many questions. If Earhart really crashed where they said, why couldn't anyone find a single trace? The Nikumaroro castaway theory rises. The search for Amelia Earhart took a dramatic turn in the 1990s when researchers began looking at a tiny dot in the Pacific Ocean. Gardner Island, now called Nikumaroro, sat hundreds of miles from where most people thought she had crashed. But something about this remote coral atoll whispered secrets that wouldn't stay buried. A team called Tighar started making trips to this forgotten place. What they found made their hearts race. Pieces of metal scattered in the sand, old bottles that didn't belong, a woman's compact mirror glinting in the tropical sun. Each discovery felt like a message from the past, begging someone to listen. The most shocking find came in 1940, just 3 years after Earhart vanished. Colonial officers on the island had discovered human bones near a campfire. They measured them carefully and sent detailed notes to Fiji. But the bones disappeared somewhere in the chain of offices and filing cabinets. Only the measurements survived, locked away in dusty government files. Decades later, scientists studied those old numbers with fresh eyes. The bones could have belonged to a tall woman, someone exactly like Amelia Earhart. The campfire suggested someone had lived there for weeks, maybe months. Someone waiting for rescue that never came. Local stories added more pieces to the puzzle. Islanders remembered their grandfathers talking about finding airplane parts on the reef. They spoke of a woman's voice on the radio, calling for help in the days after Earhart disappeared. These weren't official reports or government documents. They were whispered family memories, passed down like precious heirlooms. Expeditions kept returning to Nikumaroro, each time finding something new. A piece of aluminum that matched Earhart's plane, a shoe sole from the 1930s, even a jar of Freckle cream that adventurous women might have carried on long flights. But science demanded more proof. DNA tests on recovered materials came back empty. Metal fragments couldn't be traced with absolute certainty to her aircraft. Each promising clue led to another question mark instead of a clear answer. The island seemed to tease researchers with hints and suggestions, but never gave them the final proof they desperately wanted. Was this really where America's most famous pilot spent her last days? Or was Nikumaroro just another false hope in a mystery that refused to be solved? The debate grew louder with each expedition. Believers pointed to the growing pile of circumstantial evidence. Skeptics demanded the kind of proof that could stand up in court. The tiny island kept its secrets, letting waves wash over its coral shores, as if nothing had ever happened there at all. The Japanese capture conspiracy. Something strange happened after World War II ended. People began telling stories that chilled the blood of anyone who heard them. An old fisherman on Saipan pulled an American aside in 1960. His weathered hands shook as he spoke. He had seen 2 Americans crash on his island years before the war. A woman and a man. The Japanese soldiers came quickly and took them away. The woman had short hair and wore pants like a man. She spoke with strength, even when afraid. The fisherman never forgot her eyes. More stories came from the Marshall Islands. Children who are now grown remembered seeing a silver plane fall from the sky. They watched soldiers drag away 2 people who looked nothing like anyone from their world. These whispers reached American ears just as the Cold War made everyone suspicious. If Japan had captured Amelia Earhart, what else had they hidden? What other secrets lay buried in old military files? A woman named Josephine Blanco spoke to reporters in 1960. She had been a girl on Saipan during the war. She remembered seeing a white woman in prison. The woman had been a pilot. Japanese guards said she was important. Then one day, she was gone. The stories multiplied like wildfire. Former Japanese soldiers admitted they had heard rumors too. American prisoners who survived the war camps whispered about a famous female pilot who had been held somewhere in the Pacific. Congressional investigators grew interested. If these stories were true, The government had been lying for decades. They demanded answers from military officials who claimed to know nothing. Documents appeared that looked official. Some showed prisoner transfers. Others mentioned American pilots captured before Pearl Harbor. But experts could never prove they were real. The Japanese government denied everything. No records existed of capturing any American aviators before the war began. Their military files showed nothing about Earhart or her navigator. Yet the stories would not die. Each witness seemed to remember different details that somehow fit together like puzzle pieces. The woman pilot had been sick. She had been brave. She had been executed or died in prison or been moved to Japan itself. Family members of missing soldiers began asking new questions. If Earhart had been captured, what about their loved ones? How many Americans had vanished into Japanese prison camps that history forgot? The mystery deepened when government officials refused to release certain files. National security, they said. Even decades after the war ended, some papers remained locked away from public eyes. The Irene Bolam identity theory. The year was 1970 when Joseph Gervais dropped a bombshell that shook the aviation world. A former Air Force officer turned private investigator, Gervais claimed something impossible. Amelia Earhart was alive. Not just alive, but living quietly in New Jersey under a different name. Gervais pointed to a woman named Irene Bolam. She was a banker, a pilot, and according to him, the missing aviation legend in disguise. His book, Amelia Earhart Lives, sent shockwaves across America. Television shows picked up the story. Newspapers ran headlines. The public was fascinated and bewildered. But Irene Bolam was furious. She filed a lawsuit for $1.5 million, claiming her reputation was destroyed by these wild accusations. The legal battle that followed was fierce and public. Cameras followed every court appearance. Reporters camped outside her home. Gervais had studied photographs for years. He claimed the bone structure matched. The height was right. Even certain scars seemed identical. He brought in forensic experts who examined facial features under magnifying glasses. Some said the similarities were striking. Others dismissed the comparisons as wishful thinking. The court case dragged on. Witnesses testified about meeting Earhart in prison camps. Former pilots claimed they recognized her voice. Documents appeared that seemed to support secret rescue missions. Each piece of evidence created more questions than answers. Irene Bolam maintained her innocence throughout the ordeal. She provided birth certificates and family records. Childhood friends came forward to vouch for her identity. Her life story seemed complete and documented. Yet the accusations persisted. Most experts rejected the theory entirely. The evidence was too thin, they said. The timeline didn't work. The resemblance was coincidental. But a small group of believers refused to give up. They formed clubs and websites dedicated to proving the connection. Even after Bolam's death in 1982, the mystery continued. New researchers examined old photographs with computer analysis. They measured facial angles and compared bone density. Some claimed the technology proved Gervais was right. Others said it proved him wrong. The Irene Bolam saga reveals something profound about human nature. When official answers feel incomplete, we create our own. The void left by Earhart's disappearance became a canvas for wild theories and desperate hopes. People wanted to believe she survived because the alternative was too painful to accept. Today, internet forums still debate the evidence. New photographs surface claiming to show hidden clues. Each generation discovers the theory anew, adding their own interpretations to the mix. The legend grows stronger with time, fed by our collective need for impossible happy endings. Ongoing expeditions and unsolved questions. The search for Amelia Earhart never stopped. Even as decades passed, something about her story kept pulling people back to the vast Pacific waters. The mystery had grown stronger with time, and modern technology promised answers that previous generations could only dream of finding. In 2012, something remarkable happened near Nikumaroro Island. A team of researchers sent underwater robots deep beneath the waves. Their sonar equipment picked up something strange on the ocean floor. The shape looked exactly like an airplane. The size matched Earhart's Lockheed Electra perfectly. Hearts raced. Could this finally be the moment? But the ocean guards its secrets well. When divers went down to investigate, they found only rocks and coral formations. The sonar had played tricks on them. What looked like wings and a fuselage was nothing more than the seafloor's natural landscape. Still, the searchers pressed on. They found bone fragments on a remote beach. These weren't just any bones. They appeared to be from a woman of Earhart's height and build. Scientists rushed to extract DNA, hoping for the breakthrough that would end nearly a century of questions. The lab results came back inconclusive. The bones were too old, too weathered by salt and sun. The genetic material had broken down beyond recognition. Another promising lead had dissolved like morning mist. Advanced mapping satellites joined the hunt, scanning thousands of square miles of ocean and remote islands. They spotted debris that could be airplane parts. Teams traveled to these distant locations, often finding nothing but driftwood and natural formations that had fooled even the most sophisticated technology. Each new expedition brought fresh hope. Television crews followed researchers as they examined metal fragments, searched underwater caves, and tested soil samples for traces of aviation fuel. The public watched with fascination as each clue emerged, only to fade away under closer examination. The irony became clear. The better our tools became, the more questions we discovered. Every answer led to 3 new mysteries. Satellite imagery revealed dozens of potential crash sites. Underwater cameras found countless objects that might be airplane parts. DNA testing could analyze smaller samples than ever before, yet still came up empty. Today, multiple teams continue the search. They use robots that can dive deeper than any human. They employ artificial intelligence to analyze ocean floor images. They test bones with techniques that didn't exist when Earhart first vanished. Yet Amelia Earhart remains as elusive as ever. Each technological advance promises to be the key that finally solves the puzzle. Each expedition begins with confidence and ends with more questions. The mystery has become eternal, growing stronger with every failed attempt to solve it. What happened to Amelia Earhart? After all these years, all this searching, all this technology, we still whisper the same question into the endless Pacific wind.